Building apps without coding. It's a massive topic, but we're going to break it all down today so you can move forward with your app in the best way possible for yourself. So we're going to talk about building apps without coding. Is it right for you? How do you do it? What's the best path forward? There is so much that can go into this topic, and this video is going to lay it all out for you, step by step, piece by piece, so you can move forward confidently. Now, there's a lot that goes into this, but again, we're going to cover it all. So make sure you stick around until the end, because I want to make sure that you can move forward in the right way with your app and on the right platform too. So stick around until the end, because we're going to cover a lot. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, and we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or scale their existing businesses, all without coding. So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to go through no-code development. First, talk about what it is and what it is compared to low-code development as well. What are the differences and what do you need to know about those two different options? We're going to talk about the types of people who are using no-code tools, who it's right for, and maybe who it's not right for. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of building an app without coding, because there are a lot of really great benefits that go along with this, but then there are some drawbacks as well, and you need to be aware of those. We're going to talk about the types of platforms you can use, how to choose the right platform for yourself, what types of apps you can build. We're going to talk about security when using no-code platforms, and so much more. So again, stick around until the end, because we're going to cover a lot. All right, so let's dive right in. First, what is no-code development? So basically, it involves building an app by visually programming. So when a traditional developer creates an app, they're writing code. It really is a different language in and of itself. Now, when you're building no-code apps, all of that code is still going on in the background. But basically, no-code or low-code platforms put that behind the scenes, and they create more visual ways for you to manipulate that code. So you don't actually have to go in and touch the code yourself. It's all set up so that you can create a custom app just by visually programming. So that might mean dragging and dropping, or taking elements from all the different options that you have in the platform you're using, and then putting them on your pages in the way you want to, creating a database that will power this by visually programming the rest of your app. So there's a lot of if this, then that logic that goes into this. So when you are creating functionality within your app, for example, you have to think kind of like a developer, or even kind of like a computer, where, if this happens, then that will happen. A lot of that goes into building a no-code app. So really, it still involves a lot of logic, but you just don't actually have to write the code. And research and statistics at this point are showing that no-code and low-code development will likely make up around 67% of all development within the next few years. And that's huge. The no-code movement is this massive shift that is putting the power of development into the hands of the average Jane or Joe. Any layman can create a custom application with no technical background, no coding experience whatsoever. It's a game changer for entrepreneurs, people who are looking to create their own businesses, existing businesses, small businesses, enterprise businesses. I mean, the list could go on. So, one of the questions that traditional developers have kind of brought up alongside this no-code movement is, what is the no-code movement intended to do? Is it intended to replace traditional developers? And the answer is no. And this is important to you regardless of whether you are a traditional developer. A lot of traditional developers are using no-code platforms now. But it's important to understand that no-code is not meant to do away with traditional programming, for example. It's really designed to put power in the hands of people who otherwise would never have been able to build an app before. Because traditionally, outsourcing the development of an app can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it's really out of reach for most people. And there will always be a place for traditional developers. So they're not being replaced. But what no code is doing is it's democratizing the access to be able to build custom software. So anybody can come in and do it who otherwise may never have been able to create an app before. So that's kind of an overview of what no code is. Now, there are lots of different platforms you can use, lots of different types of apps you can build. And again, we're going to go into that more. But first, I want to talk about the difference between no code and low code, because if you've done your research, you've probably seen these two terms pop up quite a bit. So no code is just that. It's when you're literally not using any code at all. You really are dragging and dropping, you're visually programming. And that sounds very simple. It's a little bit more complex than that, and we'll talk about that. But you're really not using any code at all when you're using a no-code platform. But there are low-code platforms, and that's essentially where you can create the basic functionality of an application without using any code, but you have the option to go in and customize with code, or maybe some certain components require the use of code. So no code, you're not using any code. Low code, you're generally using some code to really get that customization you want. And now the type of platform that you really go for depends on your goals and your needs. A lot of the people who are using no code or low code tools are traditional developers themselves, because they want ways to move more quickly through their app development. And so people like that might be more drawn to low code tools because it still enables them to move really quickly throughout their development, but they can use the skills they already have to customize their apps. If you are creating your own app, you're not a programmer, but maybe you're outsourcing an app and you want to use no code tools, which is totally common, then whoever you outsource to, they might use a low-code platform, for example. If you're building an app yourself, you don't want to code at all, a no-code platform is great because you don't have to code. You don't have to have a technical background at all. So I want to talk about the types of people using no-code tools, and we've already just touched on it a bit, but there are really three main types of people who are kind of migrating to this no-code space. And one is what you might call the citizen developer. You might have seen this term before. And essentially, the citizen developer is someone who is not a traditional developer, but who maybe works within a company and they are taking on the role of becoming a developer or creating a custom application that company will then use in their own operations and processes. So, a lot of companies, they don't have the budget for IT, or their IT department is just flooded and, they're doing too much damage control to even be able to focus on, creating new things or moving forward or scaling. And so they're taking their employees who don't have any technical skills, and those employees are learning how to use no-code tools so that they can really quickly get these automated processes up and running, or start creating these apps for these companies to use. So those are citizen developers, people who don't know, they probably don't know how to program, or maybe they do, but they want to move more quickly. And they're generally doing it within bigger companies. And then we have traditional developers. A lot of traditional developers are using no-code tools now. And we have actually worked with a lot of traditional developers ourselves who are wanting to migrate over to the no-code space because they are realizing just how much more quickly they can work by using no-code tools. They can still get the same outcomes, they can still create the same processes, the same features, functionality, and so on, but they don't have to sit there and spend, weeks or months writing out the code for something that might just take them a few hours or a few days to do with no-code tools. And so a lot of traditional developers are moving over to this space. And then the third is just the regular everyday person, the entrepreneur or the business owner, for example, the people who are wanting to create apps for themselves or for their small businesses, people who don't have a technical background. Maybe they don't want to go the route of finding a tech co-founder. They don't want to hire a chief technology officer, for example. Maybe they don't want to hire a team of developers. Whatever their reasons, they want to build the app themselves. This is really common because at the end of the day, nobody knows your solution, your idea, your processes, your customers, your problems that you're wanting to solve. Nobody knows those better than you. And when you can actually build that solution yourself, it's a game changer because you don't have to worry about conveying all of your ideas to someone else or trying to get someone else, someone you're outsourcing to. You don't have to try to get them to understand it or bring your own vision to life. You can do it yourself. And so that's why so many people are moving to the no-code space. And we specifically work with a number of different clients who are building apps without coding. Most of them don't have technical background, so they're not developers themselves, but they're building fully complex, fully customized apps for their own needs and their own purposes. These clients fall into a handful of different categories, and I want to go through them so you can understand how this space can apply to you or how your situation can translate over into this no-code space. So first and foremost, we have a lot of clients who are business owners themselves. Maybe they're small business owners or they are agency owners. They might be consultants, for example, and they are wanting to create apps that will help run their internal business processes. This type of app is called an ERP or an enterprise resource planning app. And it's essentially, an custom app that handles all the internal or back-end processes involved in running a business. Now, if you run your own business, you already know how many apps or how many software programs go into making sure your business keeps on running. So an ERP essentially replaces them all. So if you are using a bunch of different software platforms to run your business right now, think about combining all of those into one custom app that you build that's built specifically for your business, specifically for your processes, specifically for your customers, your clients, and so on. So a lot of our own clients are building apps to run their own businesses. We also have the same type of person, so the business owner or the agency owner, for example, and instead of building an app to run their internal processes, they might be building an app to work with their customers or their clients in some way. So this is more of a front-facing app rather than a back-end app. So it might be a portal for their customers or for their clients, or maybe they have a course, or maybe they have a program that they take clients through, and they want to build an app to coincide with that course or that program. Maybe they're building an app to help them generate leads for their business. We see a lot of clients doing things like that. So think of, still building apps to help their business grow, but more front-facing apps versus back-end apps. And then we also have lots of entrepreneurs who they might not be building an app for their own business. They might not even have their own business yet, but they do have really deep knowledge of a specific industry that they have an idea for. So they have a solution in mind that this industry needs for whatever reason, and they want to build it out in order to create a new business or maybe create a new revenue stream. Some are people who have been successful in their careers. Maybe they are building an app that's for their industry. So again, maybe not for their own business. Or maybe just an industry in which they have a lot of knowledge in, because it can be personally related too. It doesn't have to be business related, but basically someone wanting to kind of generate a new revenue stream or build a new business entirely. We have consultants, or again, those agency owners. So these people are people who currently trade their time for money. And when you do that, when you work in that way, you max out at a certain point when you're trying to grow that type of business, right? Because nobody has more than 24 hours in a day. So if the money you make is based on the number of hours you can give, or maybe just the number of employees you can hire in the case of an agency, then at a certain point, you're going to max out. You either have to work more or you have to hire more employees in order to keep growing your business. But a lot of our clients who are in this situation, they know that the work they do can be kind of transformed into an app in some way. So maybe an app can either replace what they do entirely. Maybe they are a recruiter, for example, for a specific industry, and they can create an app to essentially do what they do. But instead of working one-to-one with people, they now want to work one-to-many, right? They have an app that can serve many, many, many people. It's essentially infinitely scalable. And so they want to kind of transition away from that hourly model and into a more scalable model. And then we also have people who work for companies, right? So employees of companies who are creating apps for their company. Now, sometimes this goes back to that citizen developer we talked about. This is sometimes the case. Other times we have people who work for a company, and the company itself is not asking them to build an app, but they are building an app that they're turning around and pitching to the company to buy, to pay them to be able to use. And this is really interesting because in this situation, you're taking someone who works for a company and deeply understands that company's problems and knows that those problems can be solved with an app. And so they're in a really unique position where they're already in touch with the management. They already have their potential users right there. They would never have to go out and find users. And so they're just creating an app that solves problems within their company, and then their company would essentially buy it from them or pay them to use it, and so on. So you can see that that is a pretty broad range of people. But essentially, they're either building an app to start an app-based business or transition into an app-based business, or building an app in order to scale their existing business. So those are kind of those two big categories where we see our own clients specifically building apps and using no-code tools for, but just in general as well. So if you resonate with any of those, then chances are you're in the right spot. So let's keep going. Let's talk about the pros and cons of using no-code tools. So, you understand what no-code is. You understand if you're in the right place, right? If you fall into any of those categories of the types of people who might be using no-code tools, if your goals align with that. And now let's talk about the pros and cons, because there are definitely a lot of benefits and a lot of advantages, but there are a few drawbacks as well. So the first big benefit to using no-code tools is the speed, right? You can build really, really, really quickly. Now, later in this video, we are actually going to dive into the speed a little bit more and talk about how quickly you can actually build an app. But for just right now, speed itself is one of the biggest factors because, with traditional programming, let's say you don't want to outsource and you want to build an app yourself using traditional, coding. It's going to take you a long time to learn, a really long time. It can take years to learn how to successfully, code a custom app on your own. And even if you are outsourcing, the process of coding an app just takes a long time, even for really, really experienced developers. It just takes time, right? That's part of it. And with no code, and again, this is why so many traditional developers are coming to the no code space, is that it's just so much faster. You can create an app, in a matter of hours or days. And there are some caveats there. So, make sure you stick around because we're going to dive into that a little bit more. And then you also have the cost, of course. That's another big one because outsourcing an app to a traditional development agency, like we talked about, that's typically out of the question for most people. For most people who are just regular consumers who are building their apps, but also for most businesses as well. Most don't have that, those hundreds of thousands of dollars to create an app for themselves. It's just not realistic. But with no code, it is, right? Not only can you build an app quickly, but you can build an app at a much lower cost. And this is primarily because you are the one who is building it. So your costs are vastly reduced. And not only that, but you don't have to be the one building the app for the long haul. And that's something that I want you to understand because, a lot of people come into this space and they think, okay, this is great. I can build my own app. And that means I don't have to spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars to outsource it, but I don't have time to build and manage this app forever. I have a business to think about, or I will have a business to think about. But the reality is you don't have to be the one building and updating and iterating and managing the app forever. You can build it. You can build the core because, again, you understand your processes, your customers, your needs better than anyone else. And by building it yourself, you will understand it. You'll understand how it's built. But then you can bring on a team of your own developers if you want to. And some of our clients are doing this as well. They're building their apps because they want to invest their own time up front. They want to understand it. They want to build it how they want, but they know that their focus will shift to other areas of the business afterwards. But by building it themselves, they can now bring a developer, maybe a single developer, maybe a whole team of developers, depending on their scale. They can bring them in-house and they can manage those developers. They can teach those developers how the app works. They actually know what's going on. And that's one of the hardest parts of outsourcing an app to a traditional development agency, is that realistically, you don't have any control over what's going on. Because if you don't have a technical background, you don't understand the lingo, you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. If you're trying to manage a developer, you don't know what they're doing. It's really hard. And so this essentially removes all of that. So we've kind of gone off on a tangent on that one, but essentially the cost. The cost is a massive benefit for this. And then you also have to think about productivity. And this is more so focused on businesses. So, when you have businesses who are running using different types of software, things happen, bugs come up, issues with the software comes up, connection issues come up. If you yourself are a business owner and you use different software platforms, you know what I'm talking about. And it is so frustrating for some internal part of your business to break, and for you not to have any control over it, for you to have to rely on some IT department or some tech person to come in on their own schedule and be able to fix it. Meanwhile, your chaos is happening behind the scenes. It's really frustrating. But with no code tools, and again, this kind of goes back to that citizen developer, you can control what goes on behind your business. If something happens, and this is normal, things happen. So I should say, when something happens, you can control it, right? So in saying productivity, what I really mean is your business doesn't have to be put on hold if something happens. Your productivity can go way up because when something needs to be fixed, it can simply be fixed and things can keep moving forward. Processes can continue to happen. And so this is a really big factor for businesses or business owners who are building apps for internal use. And then another big benefit to this is just that, when you're building a no-code app, it's really easy for you to iterate the app. And this is a factor that a lot of people don't think about when they decide that they want to create their own app, whether they're outsourcing it or they're building it themselves. So a lot of times, let's say someone is outsourcing an app, and they get a quote, and they make sure that they can budget for this and whatever, they get the funding, whatever it may be, and then they get the core of the app built, and they start bringing users on board, or they start using it themselves, and they realize that updates need to happen. They need to move into new versions, they need to add features, whatever it may be. There are always going to be costs and time involved with all of those iterations and all of those updates. App development doesn't have a finish line, right? Your app is never going to cross the finish line because your app is always going to be iterating and evolving. Now, this can take a ton of time and cost a lot of money with traditional development, but with no code, and especially if you are the one building the app, you can iterate so quickly. You can iterate on your schedule. You don't have to factor in that, extra tens of thousands of dollars for these iterations or whatever it could cost. It can go well beyond that because you're building the app. You know how the app is built. You can simply go in and make the changes you need immediately. And this is a really big advantage, especially for entrepreneurs or businesses who want to move quickly. And at least, the people who we work with, that is the case. They're coming into this space because they want to grow quickly. They want to scale quickly. They don't want to waste any more time than they already have. And this is a really big factor for them. And the last big positive, the big benefit that I want to talk about is the fact that, as the person, you as the founder with the app idea, with the solution that you want to build, your idea, your solution, your processes, your customer or your potential users, your market, all of those things better than any developer ever will, because they're all yours. They're all specific to you. You know them. They live in your brain. They live in your business. If we're talking about processes, you know them better than anyone else. And this is something that we've seen a lot of clients. We've seen a lot of clients run into this problem in the past, and it's where they start by trying to outsource their app because maybe they don't know they have the option of building it themselves. And so they outsource the app to an agency or to a team of freelancers, and the product they get back is not really what they envisioned. It's not really what they wanted. And the problem really was, not necessarily the skills of that agency or those freelancers, but just that the founder, the idea lived in their head. It's something that, no matter how well they conveyed it to another person, you can't take that picture, that image. You can't take those processes. You can't take that knowledge, that depth of knowledge that you have about whatever it is you're building. You can't just put it into someone else's brain, no matter how hard you try. And this is something that we see a lot of people run up against. And it's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people come into the no-code space in general, is because they just want the control. They want to be the ones to actually build exactly what they want, exactly how they want. And so that's another big benefit here, is that you can, right? You can do that. Of course, there are also some cons that come along with using no-code tools. There are going to be some drawbacks. And number one, it's that, there's always still going to be a learning curve. So when you're learning how to use no-code tools, when you're learning how to build an app, there's still going to be a process involved in learning how to use these things effectively. Because if there weren't, it would likely mean that whatever tool you're using just isn't very powerful or robust. And I should say, there are tools like that. And in some cases, you don't really need anything powerful or robust. And so the learning curve is going to be lower. But assuming that you're wanting to build a customized app, a scalable app, one that performs well, one that you are in control of, then there's going to be a learning curve. Any tool that you're learning how to use, and we like to use Bubble specifically, any tool that you're learning how to use that gives you the power to do those kinds of things is going to come with a learning curve. Now, it's not to say that you can't learn them, because you certainly can, but I wouldn't want you to come into this space thinking that, it's just going to be easy. It's not easy. It's a lot easier than learning how to code. And again, there are tons of benefits to building your app yourself versus learning how to code or outsourcing to a traditional development agency, but it's still going to involve work, right? If you're building something that can run your business or that can turn into a business of its own, it's still going to involve some work. We have to be realistic here, right? And you are smart. I know you know that, but there are always going to be people in the world who are, looking for that silver bullet, that magic solution. This isn't a magic solution. You're still going to have to work. So there is a learning curve that you're going to kind of come up against, but that you can work through, especially if you have the right processes, the right tools, etc. Now, the second kind of drawback, or really just a thing that I want you to be aware of, is that, you get past that learning curve, you understand how to use a tool. In our case, we're using Bubble to build apps. You learn how to use Bubble. Well, just because you know how to use a tool correctly doesn't really mean you're a developer. Okay, so when you're building an app, there's a lot more that goes into it than just using a tool, right? You have your app idea. Now, how do you go from that idea stage to actually having users on board? Well, there is a lot more that goes into that than just using a no-code platform itself, right? You have to make sure you're building the app correctly. You have to make sure that you're going through the right phases, that you're building the right things at the right time, that you're focusing on the right priorities, that you're going through the development cycle properly, that you're designing the app properly, that your users are going to be able to come on and actually use the app. You have to know where to go for those users, how to bring them on, and so on, right? And I'm not saying all of this to scare you. You have to understand that when you come into this, just knowing how to use a tool doesn't mean that you're now going to have this successful app. There's a lot that goes into it. And so generally when people without technical backgrounds come into this space, there are still a lot of unknowns, even if they have chosen the platform that they want to build their apps on. There's just so much more that goes into it. It's kind of like, let's say you learn how to use Photoshop, right? Well, just knowing how to use Photoshop doesn't make you a graphic designer, right? Or let's say you learn how to use some video editing software. Well, just because you know how to use that video editing software doesn't mean that you can now go and, edit movies or something like that, right? There's just a lot more that's involved with it. So it's something that I want you to understand, because some people come into this space and they say, okay, I've chosen the platform that I want to build my app on. Now I'm going to build my app. But then there are all these gaps and they're never able to launch successfully. They're never able to turn it into that business, or never able to use it to run their business, just because of all those other little gaps. So there is more that's going to go into successfully building and launching your app. So those are really the two, not necessarily drawbacks, but just things that you need to be aware of if you're using no-code tools to build your apps. Okay, now I want to talk about platforms. And I know this is a really big question on a lot of people's minds. What platform do you use? What types of platforms are there? How do you navigate this next step? So what I want to do is actually share my screen and jump over to our whiteboard here. So we can kind of write this out a little bit, draw it out a little bit. So I like to break up no-code platforms into three different categories, or no-code tools rather, into three different categories. So we'll have no-code up here. Now the first is kind of like your niche no-code tool. And these are platforms or tools that allow you to build very specific things without coding. So these might be things like Shopify, for example. Shopify is going to help you create your e-commerce site, right? Now you can't build any type of custom app you want on Shopify, but it is a no-code tool. You can't build any type of custom website, for example, on Shopify, but you can still create things without coding. It's just very niche. There are also, platforms that let you build things, maybe like a chatbot, and you can only build chatbots, but you can build these custom chatbots that you might want to use in your business, or that you might want to connect to another app you have, and you can do those, or you can do that all without coding, right? So we have these niche platforms that are just really specific. They cater to really specific needs. And then we have what I kind of call piecemeal. There's probably a better word for this, but piecemeal platforms. And this is where, we have more robust platforms, and, we're using different tools and connecting them all to kind of serve a higher purpose. So we might be using Airtable for our database and our forms for our app. We might be using Calendly for a booking feature. We might be using Zoom for video conferencing. And maybe we're connecting all of those with Zapier, for example, which it lets you automate different tasks, or it lets different apps communicate with each other. It's kind of a piecemeal approach to building a full application. It's not one app, but it's taking a bunch of different no-code platforms, right? Because Zoom is a no-code platform, Wafoo, where you can, or Typeform, where you can create your own forms. Those are no-code platforms. Calendly, right? These are all no-code platforms. They're tools that don't involve any coding, and you can customize them to some extent, but they each serve their own core purpose. But you can create lots of different functionality using lots of different apps, and then you can connect them all using something like Zapier. So that's kind of like the piecemeal approach. Now, a lot of people actually go from this piecemeal approach to a full no-code platform. So we'll say full platforms over here. And this is kind of like when you're using a platform like Bubble, for example, where you start with a completely blank canvas and you can do pretty much anything you want, right? You can create that niche customizations, that niche functionality that you would find on those other platforms over here. You can kind of overhaul that piecemeal approach, take all of the different components, and you can build them all from scratch if you want. Or you can, use a full platform like Bubble, for example. You can build the hub of your app, and then you can connect that hub to some of the other third-party services that you already use and that you want to keep using. So those are kind of like the three different categories of no-code tools that you might find. Now, with full no-code platforms, you actually have three other categories within that. So we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper here. Now, on one end, you have your kind of like your enterprise platforms. So these are your Zohos or your Salesforces or your Caspios. These are ones that are they're no-code platforms or they're low-code platforms. They allow you to create custom apps, but they're usually for very specific purposes or operations. Maybe it's for creating your own custom CRM, for example, or something like that. Now, usually these are really robust, they're really powerful, but they're a little bit more vertical in terms of their niche or in terms of the types of users they serve. Now, because these platforms are geared more towards enterprise businesses, they're also going to be a lot more expensive. So that's kind of on the higher end of the spectrum. But we also have kind of a middle point, which is I'm going to call it a clean slate platform. So again, this is kind of like your Bubble or maybe your Webflow, for example, where you're coming in and you're starting with a clean slate or a blank canvas. So you have the same robust capabilities, you have the same power, but instead of it being geared towards a specific type of business operation, you can really create anything you want. Now, with platforms like this, you're going to have a higher learning curve like we talked about. That's one of the kind of things to know or things to be aware of when you come into this space. Because you're starting out with a blank canvas, because so much power is in your hands, there's going to be more to learn. There's going to be a little bit more work on your part. But if you do the work, and if you learn how to use the tool and create everything you want to create, you're still going to have that same powerful app, right? But it's just all up to you. Now, the third kind of category that you'll find in terms of full no-code platforms are kind of like your template-based, your Wix type platforms, where you're coming on, you don't really have that much customization under your control. You generally have to rely on templates, and you can customize them to some extent, but at the end of the day, it's still a template. And that means that anything you create is going to be sort of cookie cutter. It's not going to be really specific to your business. You can throw up a quick landing page, for example. Maybe you can create a really quick checkout or something like that, but you're really working off of a template here. So these are kind of we have the three types of no-code platforms, and then within the full platforms category, we have three other types of platforms, and you can kind of think of these on a spectrum, where on one side we have platforms geared towards enterprise apps, and then on the other side we have these really basic template-based platforms where you can get things up and running really quickly, but you don't have that much power, you don't have that much control over the customization. And then in the middle here, you have kind of those clean slate platforms where you come on, everything is under your control. And so there is some more work on your end to do because of that. But on the other end of that work, you're going to have something really custom that's built exactly how you want. So those are the different types of platforms. That's kind of an overview of what you can expect or what you might use. Now, I also want to talk about the different types of apps that you can build for yourself. Really, when you're building a no-code app, you can build anything and everything. That's the reality of it. You're not going to find all that many limitations for your general needs. Now, again, at the beginning, I kind of talked about how traditional developers, there will always be a demand for them. No code is not replacing traditional development, but for most people's needs and most small business needs, you don't need a traditional developer. You won't be limited by using no code tools. You can build no code apps for really any niche, any industry, any market, for any business model, for any pricing model. I mean, the list could go on. We've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, and I'm telling you, their apps span across every industry and market you could possibly imagine. So I do want you to understand that you're not really limited here. And so if you're wondering, well, is my app idea really good for no code? Probably yes. That's the simplest answer for you. So in terms of some specific examples, and again, these could go on and on and on, but based on some apps that we've worked on with our own clients, you can build anything and everything from job boards for specific industries or markets. You can build just general marketplace apps or two-sided platforms for really anything you could think of, for products, for services, for, again, jobs, anything you can really think of. You can build ERP apps, and these are the apps, again, that we kind of touched on a little bit, where you're kind of creating a customized app to run your entire business operations. A lot of people who we work with, they are currently spending tens of thousands of dollars per year just on software expenses, because maybe they're using a collection of different software platforms to help run their business. And so they want to create kind of like an all-in-one solution that's custom to their own company. Now, sometimes these clients even want to then package that up and sell it to other businesses like theirs down the road. So again, lots of different examples here. And really, regardless of what type of platform we're talking about or what type of app you're using to run your business, you can generally recreate it. Or if you don't recreate every single little piece, which you don't have to, because you don't always want to reinvent the wheel. But if you're building that ERP app, you can build the hub of the app, and it can replace maybe some different software platforms you're currently using, maybe ones that aren't customized enough for you. It can replace those. But then if you do have apps that you want to keep using, well, you can just connect to those. So you don't have to build everything from scratch. You can build, some pieces from scratch, connect to other pieces, and so on. Like I said, the power is really in your hands. So that's just another example of different types of apps that people are building. Apps to help automate manual tasks. Now, this is a really big one. Think about businesses that have employees or contractors who do a lot of work out in the field, for example. Maybe they are taking notes on a clipboard. Maybe they're using pen and paper for a lot of their processes. So much is manual, and getting that data back, and not only getting it back, but getting it back correctly, can be next to impossible, because you're relying on people to, complete every single little process. And there's always going to be human error involved in that. That's just part of it. Now, that human error costs businesses time and money and resources. And by simply automating these things, by, giving those contractors or those employees an app that they can use instead of having to go in and file something with paper, for example. it can save so much time and money and extra resources. And so we see a lot of people creating apps to just really automate those otherwise manual processes and clear up all of that human error. We see a lot of analytics apps or dashboard apps, for budgeting, for example, whether it's on a personal level or a business level. Generating reports, for example, for a lot of business needs, things like that. We see, business productivity tools, whether that be with their marketing, their communications, their training, their employee training, maybe their employee management. Again, the list could go on. We see quote generation platforms where you're generating quotes for people. Sometimes this involves generating leads for a business. Maybe you have some sort of a quote generator or a calculator on the front end that kind of helps generate leads for a company. We have portals for clients, like we talked about, apps that kind of coincide with a company's services. For example, we have learning management platforms where maybe you are creating a platform to help people learn one specific thing, for one specific niche. Maybe it's a general learning platform where you're aggregating different learning materials or maybe courses, for example. We have dashboard apps. We could keep going and going and going, but you get the picture. You can build most things that you're wanting. There are very few limitations when you're using no-code tools, and there's kind of a three-part approach that we really see happening, and that's people who are building apps to save money in some way, whether that's saving a business money, saving a consumer money, to help make money. Again, business, consumer, doesn't matter, or to save time, okay, which kind of translates back to either one of those money categories, right? So it's kind of, maybe I should call it the triple threat approach. Any app that falls into one of those categories in some way can generally be built without coding, and that is going to account for most apps that people are looking to build. So next, which platform is right for you? So we've talked about the different types of platforms in general, the different types of, maybe the different combinations of platforms you can even use. We've talked about the types of apps you can build, but how do you know which platform is actually right for you? And for this one, I'm again going to jump over to our whiteboard. We're going to think of this on a spectrum as well, because we do have these three general types of app platforms, or these no-code platforms that we talked about. So let's think of those on a spectrum, where over on this left side, we have the enterprise apps. Over on the right side, we have those more template-based apps. And then in the middle, we kind of have those clean slate or blank canvas apps where you can pretty much create anything you want. So which is right for you? Well, if you're building an enterprise app, you might have some specifications, or you might fit really easily into this enterprise category. Now, that's not always the case, but generally we see enterprise companies who, if they're wanting to use no-code tools, it's usually for some really big operation within the business. Maybe they're taking their citizen developers, they're sending them to something like Zoho or Salesforce to create some custom business function or business operation. Now, again, over on this side, you're going to have the most expensive or the highest costs involved, because again, These are going to be for enterprise companies. So using the software itself is going to come with a high price tag. You're generally going to pay for the platform you're using. So you're going to be paying maybe a monthly fee or an annual fee for a plan. And you can expect these to cost in the thousands of dollars, per month, depending on what you're needing. Most of the people who we work with, they don't fall into this category. They don't need something that robust or that specific. Most people who we work with are in this middle category here, who want that kind of clean slate approach with their platform. Now, again, we work a lot with bubble.io. And the reason is because you can get the same types of features and functionality, or you can create the same types of features and functionality that you would on one of those enterprise platforms. You can do that from your clean slate. You can do that within Bubble, for example, but you can also create a lot more. So you're not confined to a specific type of app. You can build whatever you want. You really are starting with a blank canvas. Now, with Bubble specifically, it's a really powerful platform. It gives you a lot of control over the functionality, the types of features that you build, the types of customizations that you want to add to those features. It gives you a lot of power over the design, the user experience. You really are given a clean slate, right? So that means all the decisions and everything you build, it's really up to you, and you can build pretty much anything you want. Now, you are going to find some different limitations based on the type of platform that you're using. With Bubble, for example, you're not going to want to come on and build some gaming app with really heavy animations and heavy graphics or something like that, for example. There aren't that many limitations, but you really are essentially having this clean slate. So you can build pretty much whatever you want. Now, with this type of app, the cost is going to vary. It's not going to be anywhere near that enterprise level unless the platform you're using also has an enterprise plan, which some of them will. In this type of case, you might see a pricing plan that's custom, where if you're working with them one-on-one, they give you, or they kind of cater to your own needs. So that can still be an option, but you don't have to go to that level. So, again, you'll be looking at a monthly subscription fee or an annual fee. You can go anywhere from well under $100 a month to over $100 a month, depending on, whether you want specific server capabilities, for example. It can go in a lot of different ways, but for most people, if the types of apps that our clients, for example, are building, if any of that resonated with you, then chances are this is the category that you're going to fall into. And that can kind of help you decide which platform is right for you. And looking at the costs involved, that can also help you decide. And for our own clients, generally, what we have them do is start on the most basic plan. And this can apply to any platform, but with Bubble specifically, start on the most basic plan. Build what you can on that basic plan. You generally won't need to upgrade until you start creating really specific customizations, or when you start needing really specific functionality, or when you start scaling your user base, then you might need to upgrade to a new plan. But basically, start on that lower plan and then only upgrade as you need as you go. And that's going to save you costs over the long term that you really don't need to be having from the very start. So on the far right side, we have those template-based platforms. This is kind of like your Wix, where you come in, you choose a template, you make a few customizations, you don't really have that much control over the functionality. But you can get something up and running really, really quickly. It's just going to be really, really basic. Now, it's going to be cheaper because you're not getting that customization. But if you don't need it, then there's no reason to use a platform where you have that option or where you have to pay for it. So if you just need a really simple landing page, you can use something like this. You can build a really simple landing page on, this middle kind of section here on Bubble, for example. You can really quickly build a landing page. But what if you don't need the rest of that power and the rest of those capabilities? Well, then maybe one of these template-based platforms is really all you need, and that's fine, okay? But like I said, for the most part, for most of the people for all of the people who we work with, you're gonna fall right into this category. So again, if the types of apps that I've been talking about, if that resonates with you, or if any of those resonate with you, then that's likely where you're going to fall as well. Okay, so we're gonna move on now, and I wanna talk about, whether or not no code is better than coding. Okay, so let's say you're gonna outsource the development of your app. You can still outsource and build a no-code app. You can outsource to developers or to an agency who specifically create no-code apps. Or you can outsource to a traditional development agency and they'll create your app by coding. But which one is better? In reality, this is the wrong question to be asking. Instead of asking which is better, ask yourself, which do you really need based on your specific goals or your specific wants, your specific needs? What's your budget? That's one of the biggest factors because, with traditional development, you can be talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars plus to build your own custom app. Now, like we talked about in the beginning, that's really just out of reach for a lot of people and a lot of businesses. On the other end, with no code, you can outsource and that cost can be, reduced by 10 times if you want. I should say there is a caveat here, and that's that you can always pay more and you can always pay less for something, but the quality that you get in return is obviously going to reflect that. So when we talk about pricing and costs, it's really subjective. It depends on a lot of different factors, but with no code, let's say you're going to outsource and you find an agency who will build your minimum viable product maybe for $15,000 or for $20,000. And, on the flip side, you find a traditional development agency who will build that exact same thing for $150,000 or $200,000, right? So is coding better than no code? Well, instead of asking which one is better, you might start by asking which one is better for you. Is one just out of reach altogether? Is one going to allow you to create a product that you otherwise just wouldn't be able to have? Also think about the long-term aspects of this. If you're outsourcing to a traditional development agency, you're going to be doing that forever, for as long as you have the app. Someone's going to have to be maintaining it and updating it, and you're never going to be able to step away from that. And we kind of call this being handcuffed, because for the lifetime of your app, you are handcuffed to that development agency or to some development agency or to some developer, for example. Now, on the flip side, with no code, if you're building your app yourself, you don't have to be handcuffed. You're the one in control. Again, you can hire freelancers or you can build an in-house team if you want, but you're not handcuffed to it. And that's the really big thing to understand, is that you have more options. So if you're basing this on whether or not you'll be able to build what you want with no code, again, chances are you can. We've gone over a lot of different examples, so you should have a good understanding. So with that out of the picture, now you really just have to look at what's best for you, what's going to give you the result that's important to you. And that's really the question that you want to be asking and answering when you're deciding, if you're at that point, when you're deciding whether or not you want to go with no code or not. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is how fast you can actually build a no-code app, because this is a question we get a lot. And this is one of those things where I want to correctly set your expectations up front, because I wouldn't want you to commit to this thinking that something is possible and then later realizing that it's not. So how quickly can you build your no-code app? Well, the first thing that you have to ask yourself is, are you building it yourself or are you outsourcing it? Because you can still outsource your no-code app. If you're outsourcing it, of course, you're generally going to be able to build it more quickly, or you'll be able to have it built more quickly. If you're building it yourself, it's going to take longer. Now, if you've done any research in the no-code space, or you've seen people building examples of no-code apps, you might have read about people building clones of popular apps, clones of Airbnb, for example. Insert any type of app there, in a matter of days or in a matter of hours. You might have seen articles on how some person or some developer cloned this really big, robust app in a few hours. And so what that leads you to believe, understandably, is that you can build a no-code app really, really quickly. Now, this is relative. First, you can build a no-code app really quickly compared to if you were to learn how to code, or if you're outsourcing to a traditional development agency. But you also have to understand that if you're just stepping into the no-code space, if you're brand new and you're just getting started with your app, it's going to take you longer. You will not be able to build an app in a few hours. Caveat, you might be able to build a really, really simple app. You're not going to be able to build the app that you likely want. All of the different types of apps that we've gone over today, you're not going to be able to build those apps within a couple of hours or a couple of days, because again, there's going to be a learning curve involved, right? With anything that you're building that is going to be customized and powerful, that is going to support your business, or that's going to grow into its own business, there is going to be a learning curve, plain and simple. There are no silver bullets here or magic solutions. You're going to be learning how to use the tools, how to correctly scope an app, how to strategically build an app, how to successfully launch an app, right? So think about all of those things when you're asking how quickly can you build your app. We've had people ask us in the past, can I build this completely customized, complex, robust app in a month? I've never built an app before. It's not realistic. If you're building the app yourself, and it's one of the types of apps that we've talked about today. Remember, we're talking about customized, complex apps that are usually business focused, or you're at least scaling them into a legitimate business. It's going to take you longer. It might take a month for a no-code development agency to build it, but if you're stepping into it, you have to understand that you're going to be putting in more upfront work. Now, this doesn't have to take an extremely long time, but this is another factor that you have to consider. How are you choosing to learn how to build your app? Are you just doing it through trial and error? Are you just figuring it out as you go? Are you just winging it? If that's the case, it's of course going to take you a lot longer. In this case, we sometimes see people spending a year or more building their app because they're figuring things out as they go. And when you build things through a process of trial and error, it's going to take time. Now, one thing to remember is that if you build your app through trial and error, it's going to take time. One thing to remember is that if you build your app through a process of trial and error, it's going to take time. Now, one thing to remember is that if you build your app through a process of trial and error, it's going to take time. Now, one thing to remember is that if you build your app through trial and error. Once you get to the other side of that development and you're finished, you're likely going to have to go back and rebuild sometimes all of it, because if you're learning as you're building and you're spending, potentially a year learning and building your app, well, you're going to have learned a lot more by the end of that year than at the beginning of it, or even at the halfway point. So once you get to the other end and you know everything you know, well, then you're going to want to go back and apply that to the rest of your app. So if you're taking that full DIY, the do-it-yourself approach, it's going to take you a lot longer. That's just part of it. Now, if you're still taking the DIY approach where you're building it yourself, you can move more quickly if you're following certain processes or if you're using certain resources. For example, we have a program, it's a mentorship program where we take our entrepreneurs. They don't have technical backgrounds, but we take them from, having their idea, so they're in that idea stage, to having their custom minimum viable product that's functioning and that they can now bring their test users onto, right? So we go from that idea to that MVP stage in a matter of 12 weeks. So that can give you an idea of what's possible, where you come in not knowing anything, you go out having your minimum viable product. Now, even within that context, you can move more slowly, you can move more quickly. You have to ask yourself, well, how much time do you actually have to commit to your app, or how much time are you willing to commit to your app? If your app is a priority for you, you can build it much more quickly. We've had clients go through that same 12-week program and reach their minimum viable product stage halfway through, simply because they were committed to building their app quickly. They went through the same process as everyone else, but they spent more time. They focused more time and energy into their app. And, the same is true on the other end. You can go through a process that lays it out and that takes someone through in half the time, and it can take someone even longer simply because they don't sit down and prioritize spending time in their app. And this is understandable because everybody has a life, a job, maybe a family. Everybody has other things that are vying for their time. And I think that, when they come into this, they think, I really want to build my app. I'm totally committed. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to build it in a month. And then they have these big plans, they have these big goals, life gets in the way, and they just don't do it, right? So that's it. It happens to everybody, but you just have to prioritize. You have to prioritize the time. As with anything, if you make it a priority, it'll get done. You just have to make sure it's a priority. So in answering the question of how long it's going to take you to build, it really is an impossible question to answer if you're building the app yourself, because there are so many different factors that can go into play. How complex is your app, right? Are you building a full app solution? Are you building something that you're going to be integrating into a business? Are you building something really, really simple? Well, that's of course going to dictate this. But also, what are you using to help you build the app? Are you doing it all on your own? Or are you taking a really structured, high-level approach like the program that we run, for example? That's also going to make a massive difference in how long it takes you. And then how much time are you even willing to dedicate to your app, to commit to your app? Is it a priority for you, right? Those are all things that you have to consider. So keep those in mind. Make sure you have the right expectations moving forward so that you know what to expect going into it. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that we would be talking a little bit about security. And this is a big question for a lot of people who are building no-code apps. How secure is it? And, can you make sure that all your users have access to all of the right data and information, and that nobody has access to anything that they shouldn't be seeing? It's an important question to ask. And if you haven't asked it yet, it's likely coming. Now, with Bubble specifically, this is straightforward. You have to set up your database correctly. You have to set up your correct user roles. You have to set the functionality up to make sure that the privacy is in place and the security is in place, but it is something that you can do. But I want to kind of take a step back and kind of look at this a little bit more broadly in terms of security. Are no-code app building platforms secure? Is your no-code app going to be secure even if you've built everything right on your end? Well, this is how I want you to think about it. And when you're building an app with the traditional approach, let's say you have a traditional developer who is coding your app line by line. There's a lot more room for error. One wrong thing that they do can throw your whole app off, and it can be really hard to pinpoint what's wrong. But when you have no-code platforms, what's happened is there is code on the back end. So you have a no-code platform that has been developed. It, in and of itself, is an app. It's a software tool. There's code going on in the background, but you're not seeing any of it. And not only that, but you're probably not working with any of it either. So on a lot of no-code platforms, you yourself don't even have access to go in and change all of the code. Maybe you can add some code, you can add some customizations, but you can't go in and just rewrite all of the code yourself. Now, some people think of this as a limitation, but when it comes to security, this is actually a big advantage, because when you're not a programmer, when you don't have a coding background, or you don't have a technical background, you really shouldn't be going in and working with that code. Having it off limits for you means that you can't go in and tweak something accidentally that throws off your app's entire security. You don't want that to happen. Now, adding to that, with the traditional development approach, where you have a developer or a team building your app from scratch, it's something that's brand new, that hasn't been tested before. You're not, you can test it internally as much as possible, but you're not going to find everything until users start coming on board. Now, with no-code platforms, you have one platform at the core and lots of apps being built using that platform. So with Bubble, for example, you have hundreds of thousands of people building their apps using Bubble. Now, think of all of those apps that are out there in the world. That gives Bubble, or the Bubble team, so many opportunities to fine-tune their platform, because they have so many apps out there that are being used and tested, right? So this, think about it in this more overarching way. If you're building an app from scratch and you're coding it line by line, there's so much room for error. It's so hard to pinpoint that. You can't test it until it's out in the world and until things start going wrong. But if you're building a no-code app, number one, you can't actually go in and mess up any of the code accidentally. And all of that code has been tested again and again and again and again, and so many thousands and hundreds of thousands and potentially millions of times. So you can generally rest assured that your app is going to be a lot more secure. You know, this is kind of an approach that most people don't take when they're thinking about security, because when you're building your own app, you might be worried, well, what if I can't make it secure? And again, some components are up to you. And that's just a matter of making sure you do it correctly. And there are resources out there to help you with that. You know, this goes back to how long it takes you to build, what you use to help you build it, but you can do that. But then you have to look deeper at the core. And, you know, you can have a little bit more reassurance knowing that if you're using a platform that powers tons and tons of different apps, then there will have been a lot more focus on the security leading up to you building your app. So keep that in mind. Now, there's one more thing that I want to talk about regarding the no-code space, and that is what the actual costs are going to be like for you. Now, we talked about cost, or the lower cost of using no-code tools, as one of the big benefits for you. And now we're going to get into that more on a more granular level. So I'm going to, again, jump over to my whiteboard here. So when we're talking about costs, this is another one of those things where, as nice as it would be to have a clean, cut and dry answer, it actually depends. And it depends on a couple of different things. So first, it depends on the type of app you're building. You know, are you building one of these enterprise apps that we talked about before? Because if you are, it's going to cost you more. Are you just building something that's based on a really basic template? You're just making a few tweaks. You don't need any customization. You don't really need that much power. It's not going to cost you that much. Okay, so that's kind of our scale, or our pricing spectrum. But I want to take it deeper than that too. And when you break it down even further, your cost, you have to think about it based on 3 different variables. You have the cost of your app, but you also have the speed at which your app is built and the overall quality of your app. Okay, so you have these 3 factors that are going to go into you building your app. And this applies whether you're building the app yourself or if you're outsourcing your app. Now, generally, you can only have 2 out of these 3. Okay, so 2 out of the 3. You have to sacrifice one. So let's say you want to build an app you don't want to spend a lot. You want to build it really cheaply, but you also want to build it really quickly. Okay, so a cheap app that is built really fast. Well, the quality is going to suffer. Okay, you're going to be sacrificing quality because you can only have 2 of these 3 things. But let's say that you want to build a really high quality app and you want to build it really fast. Well, then the cost is going to go up. Okay, you have to account for those things. Let's say that you want the quality to be high and you want the cost to be low. Well, then you're going to be sacrificing speed. It's just going to take longer to build. If you're not willing to pay a lot, but you still want to have that quality app, it's just going to take a lot longer. So when answering the question, how much is it going to cost you to build a no-code app? First, think about the type of app you're building and the type of platform you're going to be using, but then think about what your priorities are. Are you prioritizing quality? Are you prioritizing speed? And are you prioritizing those above the cost? Or is the cost or building an app cheaply more important to you? If you want to build, a high quality app, it's going to cost you more. If you want to build an app more quickly, for example, if you're building it yourself and you don't want to take that year or more that a lot of people do when they take that DIY approach, it's going to cost you more, right? To use a process or to, join a team or join something like our mentorship program. It's going to cost you a little bit more, but your quality is going to go up. Your speed is going to be a lot faster, right? So remember that you can have 2 out of the 3, but you can't have all 3. So think about what your priorities are, and this is going to help you understand how much it's going to cost you in the long run. Now, in terms of actual prices, it's hard to say because, again, there are so many variables. Are you outsourcing? Are you building yourself? Are you building an enterprise app? Are you, starting with something like a template-based platform? Are you using Bubble? Are you, right? There are a lot of different variables, but know that the more you spend, generally, the higher the quality, the faster the speed. The less you spend, generally, the lower the quality, the slower the speed. So that should at least give you a good idea of what to expect. And of course, this is not specific to app development or the no-code space. This is specific to anything, right? So go into this with that same mindset. All right, that is going to wrap it up. So we covered a lot today. This should have given you pretty much all of the information you need to step into the no-code space. Now, the next thing you need to do is start building your app. So keep all of these things in mind. I hope this was helpful for you. Now, if you want to get started on your app right now, or if you have already started your app, but you want to make sure that you are actually building it correctly, we have a free training that you can join. If you head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, you can sign up for that training. And this is a workshop that is going to take you through the first steps with your app so you can actually hit the ground running with your development and be on the correct path forward towards having success with your app. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop to sign up for that. All right, again, I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up below and subscribe for more just like it, and we'll talk soon.